Thank you, Michael Olivier, and I want to thank all of the folks from Cable, the Committee of the Hundred, the Louisiana Budget Project, and PAR, not just for being here today and making this possible, but for the work that they've been doing for many years here in Louisiana. Really good work in a number of areas. Today we're talking about something that they've all been involved with, and that is our budget. And the reason that we're here is we've got to figure out how we're going to solve the budget cliff, which I happen to believe is the primary hurdle between us and Louisiana's next most prosperous chapter. And we need to enact comprehensive long-term tax and budget reform. And the short version of this is consistent with the task force recommendations that were made previously. So today I want to talk about where we stand with the budget, the fiscal cliff, and my proposed plan for addressing that cliff. Now, how did we get here? Well, you all know that at the beginning of my term, we inherited a state general fund deficit that exceeded $2 billion. It was built up over time by the unprecedented use of one-time funds. And over that same time period of about 7 years, trust funds were depleted by an additional $3 billion. Now, what we've been able to do is stabilize the budget in the short term, primarily by ending dishonest budgeting practices. And I want to thank Jay Darden, who's here at the Commissioner of Administration, for his good and hard work on that. You no longer see budgets that are presented that make unprecedented use of one-time money or that have contingency items or items above the line and below the line. But we also have made budget cuts that to date have exceeded $600 million. We've also achieved savings, savings that in the current year, for example, that would exceed $300 million. We also passed revenue measures because it was a balanced approach to that $2 billion operating deficit. The revenue measures were largely temporary, and they were specifically expressly enacted by the legislature as a temporary measure, primarily 27 months in duration, because they said they would get back to doing long-term comprehensive tax reform before they roll off the books. Well, those measures are going to roll off the books on June 30th of 2018, and the legislature has yet to address the long-term structural tax reform that we need to implement. And the problem today is right at $1 billion in terms of the revenue that will fall off the books. And to just put this in perspective, about $900 million of that is the fifth penny. And so that's what we're dealing with. So that is the fiscal cliff. The legislature failed to pass the tax reform in 2016, even though you're going to see that many of the options we proposed in the very first special session are consistent with those that came from the task force later. They didn't do it in the 2017 fiscal session either. On June 30th of 2018, as I've mentioned, $1 billion in revenue falls off the books. I believe that we have to replace that revenue. The only option is to impose $1 billion in cuts to state government. Now, what you all need to understand is the $1 billion in cuts can only come from about a $3.4 billion slice of the budget. It's a state general fund deficit. Only state general fund cuts can be used to make up the deficit. And the Constitution puts a number of things off limits. And you get tired of hearing it, the people of Louisiana do, and I certainly understand that, but the only two relatively large pots of money in that $3.4 billion slice of the budget belong to health care and higher education. Precisely the two areas that people across the state of Louisiana tell me they don't want to see cuts. But that's what we're dealing with. I will tell you that if we don't fix the cliff, no one is going to want to put their name on the cuts that are necessary. In fact, I will tell you this. On January the 19th, Jay Darden and I are going to present an executive budget proposal to the legislature that we don't want to put our name on, because we are constitutionally obligated to balance the budget and the revenue forecast because of the changes that happened on June 30th of 2018 will have $1 billion less than we need, $1 billion less than we have this year in revenue. And so we will be proposing, as we are obligated to do, a balanced budget. And that balanced budget proposal is going to call for cuts to health care, optional Medicaid services, partners. It's going to call for cuts to higher education, whether it's state general fund support, TOPS, and a number of other things. Not because we want those things to happen. In fact, we don't. I'm going to tell you right now, we don't want that budget ever to be implemented, which is why we have to fix the problem. But we can't fix it before we present the executive budget proposal on January the 19th. But at the same time we do it, we will let the legislature know, and in fact, I'm letting them know today, these are the things we would like them to do, and then if they do, we will take the revenue that comes from those measures and incorporate it into the budget to make sure that those cuts don't happen. Again, we've already cut over $600 million from our budget, and we are constantly striving to make government more efficient, more transparent. And one thing that I want to make sure everyone understands, the state general fund that Louisiana has today in the current fiscal year is $1 billion less than it was 10 years ago. $1 billion less state general fund than 10 years ago. I am not asking for net new revenue. This is the difference between early last year and the present situation. A revenue neutral solution is what I am asking for. So it ought to be an easier hurdle to get over, especially since the legislature has spent an awful lot of time looking at all these proposals. They know what the options are. The people of Louisiana know what the options are. Now is the time to move forward. And why is it important? Because Louisiana is really positioned for an era of prosperity going forward, the likes of which we haven't known in a long time. And we see many signs pointing to this. For example, right now, unemployment is at 4.8%, the lowest it's been since May of 2008. We recently announced the largest, the biggest economic development win in the state's history as it relates to permanent direct jobs at one site, with DXC Technologies coming to New Orleans. In fact, the central business of New Orleans with 2,000 direct jobs. Another 2,200 indirect jobs will result from that as well. But I can tell you, we would not have announced that. Those jobs would not be coming to Louisiana, but for the fact Louisiana committed to higher education in the current year sufficiently to satisfy the folks at DXC Technologies, because these are the meetings I had with them. They wanted to know that we were going to have a higher education system in our state where they would get the talent pipeline in place that they need for success, meaning trained, educated, skilled employees. That's going to be the key to getting a lot more economic development wins and job creation in Louisiana, and underscores the need to fix this cliff. Louisiana ranks number 5 among top states for doing business, according to Area Development Magazine, and Louisiana ranks 4th in the country for small business-friendly states, according to Thumbtack.com, that gave Louisiana an A+. We also have other good things coming. Because of the measures that we've taken, because of the disciplined approach we've taken to state government. Just last week, the Revenue Estimating Conference upgraded our forecast in the current fiscal year by $153 million. Upgraded the forecast next year in terms of state general fund revenue by $234 million. And that year that I told you about that we started off with, the first full fiscal year with that $2 billion budget deficit, we closed the books with a little more than $120 million surplus. Now, it's been a long time since the state of Louisiana talked about surpluses, especially in the mid-year. This will be the first year, maybe in the last 8 or so, that did not have a mid-year budget cut. That's because of the stability that we've been able to have in Louisiana because of the disciplined approach to governing. So the foundation is in place. And I do want to point out that even though our revenue projections for next year are increased, it is not enough to solve the problem. So the plan. You know, last year the legislature couldn't come to a consensus, even though we had a fiscal session, and it was the last fiscal session that was regularly scheduled before the fiscal cliff. Not a single bill passed out of the Ways and Means Committee for consideration by the House as a whole to address the cliff, notwithstanding the fact that every single task force recommendation that had been made was contained in a bill that was pending in front of that committee. But we have to get it done this time. Having said that, the right time to get it done is at a special session in February. Because the regular session in March is not fiscal. We can't fix this problem then, and if we don't fix the problem, I'm willing to go out on a limb and say that we won't pass a budget. We won't pass capital outlay. We will have a very nasty 3-month session that won't be productive, and then our only option will be to come back into a very short, condensed special session in June to fix the cliff, pass a budget, pass capital outlay, all within about 3 weeks. And that is exactly the wrong way to do it. So we need to get forward, move forward with the business at hand, which is why I'm releasing the plan today. This is an invitation for the legislature, specifically the House, but the legislature as a whole, to take this plan, look at it, and say, these are the things we can agree with the governor on, these are the things we can't, but where we can't agree, we're going to sit down and we're going to find a common approach. You know, the word compromise is not a dirty word. It is the best route forward. Now, having said that, I'm going to be flexible. I'll look forward to compromising with the legislature. I want to come up with a plan that we can all embrace. I think that that's critically important if we're going to get this done. Now, I took the situation as it relates to the budget, the task force recommendations, and I've had well over 20 meetings around the state of Louisiana with businessmen and businesswomen, with local elected officials, different civic organizations, and what I kept hearing over and over again was the need to create stability and predictability in Louisiana so we stop this yo-yo effect. And by the way, the same stability and predictability that businesses want for themselves, the government needs to have in the state of Louisiana as well. You know, it's true that Louisiana, the tax burden, state and local combined, is one of the 5 lowest in the country, but we have one of the 10 most complex tax systems in order to administer and to comply with. That doesn't make any sense. And so we can do reform that produces more stability and predictability, does it in a fair way, and also makes our tax system simpler. And I won't be proposing anything new. It won't surprise anybody. All of the proposals that I'm making come from the legislatively created task force. And in that sense, I'm proposing to the legislature that it adopts its plan. And I am not proposing a tax increase. These proposals are revenue neutral. So I am going to make the following recommendations to the Speaker and to the Senate President. And that is that we make permanent the reductions to tax credits, deductions, and rebates that are going to sunset at the end of this fiscal year. That we compress the income tax brackets and reduce the excess itemized deductions from 100% to 50%. That the 5th penny roll off the books as scheduled, and that the 4 pennies that we keep, we will clean those from exemptions so that they look like the 5th penny that will roll off. So this is a classical way to lower the rate and broaden the base as it relates to the sales tax. I would adjust the business utilities tax to 4%, which is what they are currently paying, and I would set the industrial utility rate at 2%. Finally, I would expand sales tax to certain services based on the model that we have in Texas. All of those recommendations come from the task force. Now, there's going to be some flexibility required for a couple of reasons, but primarily, right now in Congress, they're working out the final details on a conference committee report, and maybe they've already done that will be voted on potentially this week by both the House and the Senate, and they will make changes to federal tax as it relates to individual and corporate income that will have an impact on us going forward. Generally speaking, if they give a tax cut at the federal level, that means that the deduction for federal tax gets smaller and individuals will pay a little bit more at the state level. And so we will accommodate that in changes to what the new brackets ought to be. And until that new structure is in place and producing revenue, I am flexible on that fifth penny in terms of keeping a part of it to provide a bridge to that additional revenue that we are going to have. And it's going to be a while before we're able to model that and achieve the kind of predictability that we would want. But we will be working extremely hard. And in fact, the Revenue Secretary, who is here with us today, Kimberly Robinson, is already working on that. I'm willing to be flexible. This is an invitation to the Speaker, to House leadership, and to the President and members of the Senate to look at this plan and come back and sit down with me and negotiate a path forward. Now, having said I'm willing to be flexible, you should understand that if it were up to me, I would do exactly what I just put forward. I do think it's the right thing to do for the state for all the reasons that the task force has made plain. But we have to have something on the table from the legislature, and we have not. There has not been one comprehensive idea to come from the legislature to address the fiscal situation in our state since I have been governor. I have not seen an alternative plan. Now, the flexibility that I will have does not extend to the fifth penny itself, other than using some portion of it as a bridge to new revenue. The legislature enacted it as a temporary measure. The sales tax is the one area where we are an outlier in the country. We have the highest combined state and local sales tax burden in the country, and that fifth penny of sales tax should roll off and go away. So, in conclusion, I'm asking for the support of the members of the Committee of 100, PAR, Cable, and the Budget Project, but people generally across the state of Louisiana, all those businesswomen and men that I met with, all the ones that I didn't meet with. I'm asking for the support of civic organizations, stakeholders, whether you're interested in higher education or health care or corrections, whatever it might be, to work with us and get this done finally. It's critically important that we do it and that we do it now. And it's time that we stop looking at the options. We know what the options are. We have to move forward. And sometimes leadership requires that you do the hard thing. But we're going to be so much better off when we do it. And what we cannot do is continue to have groups of legislators who just say no to everything. They say no to every proposal. They don't come up with a proposal of their own, and they don't support the necessary cuts that come about if we don't have the revenue. Saying no to everything is the biggest part of our problem today. And we need legislators to be more constructive than that. And yes, we still have a very difficult budget year, even if we replace this revenue, because there's a continuation budget that has a $400 million problem associated with that, and there are going to be cuts next year. And for those legislators who say, well, we know we have $1 billion in revenue falling off the books, but we don't want to raise $1 billion, I'm going to say you're obligated at that point to be specific about the cuts you want to see, because we all have a constitutional obligation to deliver a balanced budget, not just me. And so I want to see some specific cuts, and I am happy to consider them if they do that. What I won't consider is what they've done in the past, is when they just say, well, there'll be $300 million cuts to the Department of Health, and Governor, you go figure out what they are. That's not my plan. That is not my plan, and that's not in the best interest of the state of Louisiana. So you all now have the outlines of my plan. I think it's important that we move forward with a special session in February. I would love to call it. I'm not going to call one if there's not broad agreement between me and legislative leadership on a specific plan to move forward, because without that support from the leadership, there's not going to be the 2/3 vote that we need to be successful. And I'm not going to call a special session just for the sake of calling one. But having said that, I actually stand before you optimistic that we are going to rise to the occasion. We're going to face this challenge head on, and we're going to fix it. And we're going to move on with a state that is going to be in a much better position to afford people the opportunity they need for success right here. That's why I ran for governor. I suppose that's why everybody serves in government, because you want people to be successful. You want your children and your grandchildren to have more opportunities than you had, and you don't want them to have to go somewhere else to realize those opportunities. We've got some great things happening in Louisiana today. There's going to be even better things tomorrow, but it's going to be because we fixed this challenge, and I'm optimistic about it. And with that, I want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And may 2018 be the best year ever for you and your families, but also for the state of Louisiana. And I'm going to continue to work as hard as I can every single day to make that happen. Thank you.
Anytime I talk to Republicans in the House, they seem much more interested in considering renewing that penny for the long term than they do in individual income taxes. Can you tell me what discussions you've had with them that seem to indicate otherwise?
I don't know that I've had any discussions that indicate otherwise. However, I can tell you I've had an awful lot of Republicans tell me, and just about every single Democrat, they are not interested in maintaining that fifth penny. They put it on as a temporary measure. They intend for it to go away. They know it is the most regressive form of taxation there is. They know it makes us an outlier in the country, and we have the opportunity to do what is traditionally thought of as very conservative tax philosophy, and that is broaden the base and lower the rates. Lower the rate from 5 to 4, expand the sales tax to services, and also take many of the exemptions off the 4 pennies that you keep. That seems to me to be a much better path to move on, and that is fully consistent with the task force recommendations, which it was a legislatively created task force that was supposed to study and make these recommendations for tax reform.
So when you left the meeting Thursday with Speaker Barras, how did you leave it with them? I mean, what are their marching orders, and by when do you think you'll know whether there is enough of a consensus to move forward?
Well, I told him that since he had not brought a plan to me by then, and we had had several meetings, that I would be issuing my own this week. He now has it. When I say he has it, it's on its way to him through the media and otherwise. And I'm expecting him to sit down with House members and House leadership and come back and start negotiations. And he knows that this is time sensitive, because if you think about it, a special session only fits between Mardi Gras and around the 1st of March. And so we would have to call that special session in about a month. But that also leaves us precious little time to go out and work and to sell the plan that we come up with to the key stakeholders, to businessmen and businesswomen, to the good government groups here, to higher education, healthcare interests, and so forth. And so time is of the essence. We're actually a little later than I wanted to be. Initially, when I started meeting with the Speaker back in September, it was my hope and expectation that by the 1st of December we would actually have that plan. I suspect we're going to be running about a month behind that, but I do hope that in a couple of weeks we have a plan that we can jointly endorse and go out and promote. I think that's the only way to be successful.
Governor,
Yes, ma'am.
would you like a response prior to the January 19th sort of doomsday budget?
Well, you know, I will tell you again what I said earlier. The January 19th executive budget proposal will be what is constitutionally required. It's going to be in balance. As a result, because there will be $1 billion less than the current year, that it will show those cuts. And it's going to show those cuts in areas that I would never want to cut. We will at the same time submit to the legislature a separate document that talks about the need to replace the revenue that's falling off the books with new revenue, not more revenue, but a revenue neutral solution, and how we would incorporate that revenue into the budget were that to happen. Now, it would be great if when Jay and I are presenting that executive budget proposal, it's not a purely academic exercise, but we have already come to that agreement as to how we would do it, because I think it would serve to underscore the need to go ahead and get it done. And so it would certainly be better. It's not essential, because that document is going to be the same regardless. But if there has been an area, if there's been an opportunity to come to agreement, then obviously it's not a purely academic exercise. It's one that I think that has more meaning both for the legislature and for the people of Louisiana. Yes, sir.
Obviously, this plan doesn't include CAT, and you're emphasizing the revenue neutral, but what about this is different enough that you think the lawmakers will buy onto it?
Well, first of all, I don't know that it has to be different. Sometimes lawmakers move just because the sense of urgency is greater. You know, I always thought it was going to be difficult to get a 2/3 vote out of the legislature to do hard things in the fiscal session in 2017, earlier this year, simply because the legislators' toes weren't dangling off the edge of the cliff yet. Sometimes that's what's required, is they're dangling their toes off the cliff. They've had a up-close and personal look at what the cuts look like if they don't fix the cliff, and sometimes that's what's required. And so, you know, we don't need new options. The options have always been out there for us. We just need to move forward with the ones that we have.
One last question.
I have a question about the bridge, the pending bridge.
Yeah.
Are you saying the bridge will be just to maybe this revenue that's coming in from federal tax changes or any revenue?
No, I can specifically talk about using some part of the fifth penny as a bridge to whatever additional revenue we can expect to get at some point in the future because of the tax changes that are likely to come from the conference committee report currently pending in Congress. However, there may be other changes that we are making on our own tax structure that won't be up and running and producing revenue, and we might need to keep some part of the penny for that as well. But keeping the part of the penny for a bridge is not something that I'm opposed to. It's part of the flexibility that's built into our plan. And by the way, that has been consistent. I've been saying that ever since I started moving across the state and having these meetings on the fiscal cliff.
So it can be a bridge to revenue, it doesn't have to be specifically this federal tax?
Correct. You know, let's say that, for example, that we change the excess itemized deductions and we change the brackets on the individual income tax. Kimberly's going to tell us when that revenue would start coming in, and it may be necessary to keep some portion of the penny in place until that happens, in addition to whatever we have to do to accommodate the federal changes. I've been consistent about that from the beginning. What I am opposed to is leaving part of the fifth penny on to solve the cliff on a permanent basis. That is inconsistent with the task force report. It is inconsistent with my own judgment about what is best for Louisiana today, especially given the fact that while we have the fifth lowest state and local combined tax burden, we have the highest sales tax in the nation. We just shouldn't. We should do better. Thank you all very much. God bless and Merry Christmas.